Hello. So I've got a few of you in here, which is kind of nice. There's some session going on there, so maybe we'll get some more people trickling in as we go. But let's just go ahead and dive in and see what we got. In this session, we're going to be talking about the new social web. It's about open standards. So I'm going to talk a lot about open standards, and I'm also going to talk about a few other things. We'll go deep into that. But first, a little bit about me. I'm a developer advocate for Google, so I speak primarily to external engineers building on our products and platforms, which is super exciting, and I absolutely love my job. And you can find me online at buzz.timothygjordan.com, which is my Google Buzz profile, and my Twitter handle, TimothyJordan. Oh, should I hold on for just a second?
It'll be like maybe 1 or 2 minutes.
Okay, I'll stall.
Still, good plan. Just tell them more about yourself.
There's really only so much to know about me. Apparently the session over there is going to go another minute or two, so we're going to stall for a couple minutes to see if we get some more folks, rather than have them join in the absolute middle. You know what would be great is if there are any initial questions, anything about anything you've learned today, or about Google, or about the social web that's on your mind, and we can address those, so we're using our time instead of just waiting. Any
new features coming to Google Wave?
Any new features coming to Google Wave?
Isn't Apache Wave?
We are no longer actively developing Wave, so no. No, and I think that what you'll find is the Wave community is still healthy and strong, and people are very excited about the protocol. So there are a lot of people still doing work on Wave, just not the way they were. Hey, look, there's lots of people now. So I'd stay pay attention to that, the Wave protocol. There's quite a few applications externally that are using it, and it's pretty exciting what's going on there. It's a good question. Any other random questions? Yes?
I noticed today that there's a social search in Google. It puts the users that are using the site underneath your search.
Mm-hmm.
Is this a new feature?
It's been there for a little while.
I noticed today that there's some new addition.
Oh, interesting. I haven't seen it. Can you show me? Excellent use of the Chrome Web Store, by the way. Somebody's been installing applications.
I didn't notice this before.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, you got me. I haven't read the post about that yet. We do surface a lot of social results in search, which is pretty fantastic. So, and I know that's something that we're actively developing, so I would expect to see quite a few more features show up in that area. All right, we got a bunch more people, so I'm gonna keep rolling then. So you can find me online. Both Buzz and Twitter are great ways to engage me in conversation. I encourage you to do so, because today only lasts for so long, but I'm still online. We should continue this conversation. If you want to tweet, we've got a hashtag, and also that URL up there goes to these slides. So if you want to check out these slides later, and I'll flash that URL up again later as well. So I'm going to be talking about, first and foremost, open standards. And then I'm going to move into talking about Google Buzz and how it's built on many of those open standards. And then I've got some key messages at the end. Sound like fun? You guys are so energetic. Must be like right after lunch or something, right? Okay, well let's plow through and see what happens. Open standards. I think they're a really good thing. But the question that you should be asking me after I make a statement like that is why? Why are open standards such a good thing? And it turns out at Google we have to ask ourselves this question rather frequently, because we do believe in using standards where they exist. Yeah? But why do we do that? When we're making a new API, like the Google Buzz API, if there's a standard that exists, we have to ask ourselves, is it the right thing to use this for our developers and for our users and for ourselves, or should we roll our own? And if it doesn't make sense to use the open standard, then we need to know that. But most of the time, we find using open standards is the best option, and this is why. First off, open standards, the value proposition for them is very similar to the value proposition for open source. What's the value proposition for open source? I don't have anything to give away. I feel like I must ask. No, I guess not. So the value proposition for open source is, as many of you probably already know, first and foremost, the freedom to do what you want with your software, right? And this is really, really important. With open source, you can add features that you want to use internally. You can contribute those back to the community. You can be really flexible with that piece of software in a way you can't with a piece of proprietary software. The second thing is community. When you're part of an open software movement, you join a community that's part of that same open software movement all around the world. And it's good for two key reasons. One, they do a lot of the engineering for you, which saves you time, energy, and money. And the other thing is that it's not just your interest involved in a piece of software. So that piece of software becomes functional and useful for a wide array of people, not just you. Which in general we've found other people contribute features that you wouldn't have thought of, but that you really want to use once they're there, right? So freedom and community, two pillars of open source. Open standards, pretty much the same thing, right? You have the freedom to do with that standard what you want. You can contribute back through the community. And you get community responsibility distributed, all about. But then there's two other things that are really super as well. First off, you get a vast simplification of the landscape. Right? Instead of learning a whole bunch of different standards for one data encapsulation, you get to learn one. That's so much better, especially as a developer. If you're writing an application that wants to talk to several different service providers, understanding just one protocol instead of 10 protocols makes your life a lot better. And then the second is interoperability. Yeah? When you speak between applications, not having to translate from one data type to the data type that you use is better. If you're using activity streams and somebody else is using activity streams, you can just consume that and use that as you would. All right, so we've got freedom, we've got community, we've got simplify the landscape, and we've got this interoperability. And in those four reasons alone, I think using open standards almost always makes our lives better and makes other people's lives better. And that's a good thing. With me so far? All right, so let's jump into looking at some specific open standards for the social web that I think are really important. First off is OAuth. Who here is familiar with OAuth? Quite a few of you. That's nice. Okay, so for the rest of you, OAuth is open authentication for API access. Oh, there's the mugs. They're on the table. Oh, I didn't see those. I had to cross the stage to see them. OAuth is really, really great for giving applications access to user data through APIs. Before, how we used to have to do this is we'd ask the user for the password. Just totally lame. Then we need to keep their password, and we access their account through their password, scraping data, having full access to their account. It's unsafe for the user. It's troublesome for us because now we have to store these passwords, right? Nobody wants that hot potato. The next thing that we tried is that we used these API keys. The user would log in, go to a preferences screen somewhere, copy an API key, go back to your application and paste it in. This was better because they could change their password independently and you still have access to their data. But it was bad because all the applications use the same API key. And the user flow for actually getting access to their data, super lame. You know, giving the user instructions to go look for a number somewhere, copy and paste it into your application, that's not good. So then we came upon this thing called OAuth, which is really great. Essentially, we send the user to a web page on the service provider. They authorize the application, some data is sent back, and then that application uses that data to access the user data. And we implemented scopes, where the application can access a certain subset of user data. Right? So if you have a complex system, maybe you just give the application access to the contacts instead of the contacts and the email. Right? So let's see how that works. I just kind of wanted to go over the flow of OAuth because I think it's super interesting. you've got your application that gets an unauthorized request token from the service provider. You then send the user to the service provider with that unauthorized token, right? It indicates who your application is. And the user is presented with an authorization screen, and they can hit grant access or deny. Probably grant though, right? And they then get sent back to your application with an authorized request token. You exchange this for an access token, and then you can access the data. Pretty simple, right? Send the user over to the service provider with some information, they authorize, they come back, you do an exchange, and now you can access their data. And then in the meantime, you get to access a limited scope. The user can authorize just for that scope. And at any time, the user can go to the service provider and revoke your token. I can go in and see a list of applications that are authorized to use the data on my Google Buzz service, and I can remove the token for any one of them that I want. Isn't that awesome? So that's OAuth. Really cool. All right, the second one I want to talk about is Atom. Who here is familiar with Atom? We're going to do an experiment, so keep your hands up. Who's familiar with Atom? All right, keep your hands up. You're in the front row, you have to. Who here has been to a web blog? Keep your hands up. Who here has seen more than 10 websites on the internet? Statistically, all of you have used Atom. Okay, put your hands down. Atom is encapsulation for data syndication, mostly on blogs. And even if you didn't know you were using it, you probably were. It looks like this, which is kind of like a bunch of goop, right? I remember the first time I saw Atom, it was kind of like the first time I saw raw HTML. I didn't really know what to make of it. But just like with raw HTML, you can remove some of the extraneous extension elements. And then you can highlight the stuff that's required, and it vastly simplifies the view of things, right? Atom has a lot of stuff you can include, but it's really just a very simple syndication encapsulation. There are only 3 required elements: an ID, which is a unique identifier, and that's for at the feed level or the entry level; an updated, right, which is the last modified; and a type. And then there's some optional elements like the author and the link to that feed. And that's all it is, right? Atom is just an encapsulation format. It's important by itself, right? Because without something like Atom and all these blogs using Atom, you couldn't have something like Google Reader, right? Can you imagine if Google Reader, our engineers, had to write for 300 different syndication formats? It'd be so painful and bothersome. So it's important in and of itself, but also because open standards and specifications for the social web are using Atom as a basis upon which they add extensions. So here's a standard that defines the format of all these different types of information. And now we can add other stuff onto those, and we'll look at one of those in a moment. First, let's skip over to the real-time web. This one is my favorite to say. It's got the coolest name. Pub Sub Hubbub. Say that 10 times fast. And Pub Sub Hubbub enables the real-time web. It enables real-time delivery of data to your application, right? And some of you might say we already had that, but this is what we've been doing. We've been doing a thing called polling. Polling is a huge bummer. Essentially what that means is every 30 seconds or so, my application accesses the data on the foreign service and sees if there's any new information. And if there's not, whatever. 30 seconds later, it asks again. And 30 seconds later, it asks again. There's thousands of these, right? Applications asking for data from a single source. You can see how troublesome that is and how inefficient that is, right? Instead, wouldn't it be cool if that foreign service could just push out data to the applications that want it? That's what Pub Sub Hubbub enables. Let's take a look at the flow. First off, there's 3 elements. There's publisher, a subscriber, and a hub, which is where the name comes from, right? Pub, sub, hub, and then the bub is just for fun. And this is what the flow looks like. First, the subscriber asks for the publisher's feed. And the publisher will respond if they're hub enabled, often with a feed that includes a hub link. So this will look much like an Atom feed, right? But in there, there's an item that specifies a hub. There are some other services that will only deliver via pub sub hub, like the Google Buzz Firehouse. But most of them, it's written such that they can have this backward compatibility for people that can't speak pub sub hub or say. So the subscriber takes this link and then sends a callback URL over to the hub, which is essentially, I want you to call this endpoint every time you have new data for me. Right? So the subscriber needs to be a service on the internet with an exposed endpoint, which is just a URL, right? It's like a form submission. And the hub will do a verification step. It's just going to make sure that the subscriber actually wanted to subscribe before it starts sending tons of data. And if you're talking about a feed such as the Google Buzz Firehouse, this is really important, because if it was a small server, you could potentially knock it over with the amount of data you're sending it. And we don't want denial of service attacks to be enabled by PubSub PubUp, so we do this verification step. Subscriber will obviously say, yes, I really do want to do this. And then we start sending data. But first, the hub needs to get the data. So it happens one of two ways. Either the publisher sends the data via push to the hub, which is the best thing to do, or the hub does polling at a high frequency. Right? They just ask for the data, and then the publisher gives them the data. Now, again, this is polling, and polling in principle is bad, but it's much better to have high frequency polling from hub to publisher than from thousands, millions of subscribers to publisher. Right? It's a much, it's a huge difference in scale, complexity, and latency. So when the hub gets new information, it just pushes it out to the subscriber. That's it. One call. Just hits the endpoint with a fat ping, is what we call it, which means that it pings the endpoint with the content. And the subscriber can just accept that content and do with it as it will. The hub can do this to one subscriber or all those thousands of subscribers. Right? So the data comes in real time as it's produced. And of course, we can do really complex scenarios as well. I stole this graph. And I'm told it would work. But it's crazy, right? Look at all those arrows. But you can imagine not using pub sub hubbub would be 2-3 times the amount of arrows. So pub sub hubbub. Who was familiar with pub sub hubbub before this talk? Just a couple of you. Okay. It's one of my favorite protocols. I really recommend you check it out. Salmon. I'm not going to talk about Salmon in much depth, but I do want to let you know that it's out there. Salmon enables cross-site comment sharing and syndication, such that if you have a whole number of aggregators that reproduce the same content, you can share a single conversation between all of them. Salmon lets you do that, and it's really important as well, I think. All right, and this is perhaps one of the most important encapsulation formats in the social web, and it's called activity streams. This is a URL. You can go to activitystream.ms and find out more about this. Who is familiar with activity streams? Wow, okay. This is super important. And it's really, really simple. That's the crazy thing about a lot of this stuff, right? Is that it's built on Atom, so you've got the whole syndication stuff and updated and title and unique IDs. But then you add 3 more elements that allow you to syndicate users' activities. So instead of just syndicating a blog post, right, where you got a title and then the content and maybe some stuff inside, you can actually syndicate something that I do on a website, right? It's different. We had to make a new format to encapsulate this. And these 3 elements are really straightforward. An actor. You need to know who's performing this action. The verb. What is the action we're performing? And then finally, the object. Okay? So actor, verb, object. Who, what they're doing, and what they're doing it to, or with, or by, or from, or what have you. For example, Timothy posts a note, right? Pretty straightforward. Timothy, that's me, the actor. Posts is the verb, and a note is the object. And this is the basic activity in the Google Buzz API. We can do other things too, like one of my dream scenarios. Barack Obama started following me, Timothy Jordan. I mean, it's probably going to be more like this, but you get the idea. We've got an actor at the top, we've got the verb, started following, and we've got the object, which can be another person. Right, pretty straightforward. And this is extensible, right? It doesn't just have to be posts a note or started following. Over time, as we get more detailed scenarios on the social web, we can encapsulate them as well in activity streams. For example, if I were to have tea with a movie star, which actually happened, I could encapsulate that with activity streams. It's totally not a cardboard cutout, I promise. All right, so that's activity streams. Pretty straightforward, right? Let's take a quick look at these in scenario, right? Inside the Google Buzz API. The Google Buzz API exchanges a lot of data through various protocols and various encapsulations, but primarily it's based on these open standards and specifications. Let's take a few of them one by one. First off, I wanted to show you some raw response of an activity stream. I thought that would be pretty interesting. So activity streams, actor, verb, object, Timothy posts a note. So let's look at these items in the stream. Now what I've done here is I've highlighted in black the items that you want to be interested in. The rest is gray. You might not be able to see that very well at the back, but you can always, if you're really curious, look at this, my slides online, or even better, go check out the Buzz API and get the data yourself. The actor includes what you would need to know to identify the actor. In this case, it's a unique identifier, right? So this service is always going to be a unique ID to identify me. A name, a display name, which is not necessarily unique. Suffice it to say, other people use the word Jordan to identify themselves, such as your country. A profile URL and a thumbnail URL, right? So with this, you can get my identity nice and easily. The verb, right? The verb here is post. So it's pretty simple right there. You go post. And then finally, the object. And the object here is really simple content. It's a 3-word phrase. Content goes here. But you can put a huge amount of content in this, right? Just enclosed in those quotation marks. We actually had a partner when we were testing out the API just for fun, trying to put the entire works of William Shakespeare in there. It totally worked. Crashed his application. But the Buzz API was fine. And then, of course, in this stream, I wanted to highlight some of the other elements, right? It's an Atom stream. So, this is actually JSON, but it's based on the Atom specification. We've got a title, we've got a published date, an updated date, and a unique identifier. And then we have some other things, like the liked, right? The number of times people have liked this post. The replies, which are the inline comments, right? We show how many comments there were, and then give you a link to get all of the comments. We've got the source. Right? This identifies the application that actually posted this activity. And we also have the visibility. It's super important to us that Google Buzz posts have per post privacy settings. So every activity or post will have privacy included in the feed. Geolocation, right? We provide the latitude and longitude as well as something like an address or a place name, right? That allows you to identify the user maybe on a map or in sort of plain language where they are. And then things like embedding images we can do with the attachment specification. Right? So you can see this is a very robust and versatile format, but when you break it down to its component pieces, it's actually very, very simple. All right, I wanted to show you the OAuth screens. They're pretty simple, right? This is what it looks like when you send a user to the Google Buzz API. And most other services that implement OAuth have a very similar setup, a very similar screen that explains exactly what the application will have access to. And then it'll ask the user to continue and then grant access. Right? That's OAuth. And then for Pub Sub Hubbub, we actually have quite a few feeds. Most of the public feeds are available via PubSub. So you could subscribe to my production feed via in real time with PubSub. But then we have a few other items that use PubSub exclusively, such as our fire hose, right? It's a very dramatic graphic, right? Well, the Google Buzz API, we actually give away every public activity that happens anywhere in the world written by anyone in real time via PubSub. And because of the amount of data we're pushing through, it's only available through PubSub. A feed wouldn't really make sense, right? Because that feed is just going to grow forever. It'd be huge. And then we also provide a development version, which is the garden hose, which is a small percentage of the fire hose. And then we provide interesting things like the search, right? The track, which allows you to get all the public activities as they happen that match a certain query. All right, so those are the ones that I just want to mention. And then just to wrap up with some key messages here, remember that open standards are good for very clear reasons, not just because they feel good or it's fun to be part of open source and open standards, which it is. You know, you can wear that like a badge at the coffee shop. I work on open source. But open standards are provable, right? Because you get freedom to affect them. You get to work with inside a community. You get to simplify the landscape for yourself and other developers, and you can translate data easier from application to application, especially if you're speaking the same language. And also, I think Google Buzz is cool. So thank you very much. I think I actually do have a couple minutes for questions. Is that right? Yes. So let's go ahead and take 2 questions, and I will give you a mug. But it has to be a good question. Not like, why is your hair red? Which may be a valid question, but has nothing to do with what we're talking about. Yes?
It's more of a suggestion than a question.
Oh. Let's go put the mug over here.
I already told you about some of it. The suggestion is like being able to sort in Google Buzz according to timeline, chronological order, timeline, maybe categories. Like I don't want to see everyone. I want to sort them according to, for example, like the most commented or the least commented. No one commented on them yet. According to date, sometimes, and Buzz especially, I really like that feature where they don't sort according to date. They sort like they're more personalized. But sometimes it's more useful if we have the option to see them like most recent at the top.
Okay. So it sounds like a suggestion both for the consumer product and the API, right? Because the API provides a consumption feed as it exists in the consumer product.
Yeah.
So it would be cool, as you're saying, to be able to sort by date in both of those places. I think that would be cool. Should I give him a mug?
Yep.
All right, one more question. And by the way, right after this, I'll be available in the demo pods area. So if you want to come hang out, that's super cool.
It's using those standards, so can you interconnect with other social networks by now?
So that's a very, very good question. And let me just sort of repeat it, just to make sure I got what you're saying, is that since it's using open standards and other networks are also using standards, can we connect Buzz with those networks? And it's a very complicated answer, right? Especially when you talk about the large networks and large service providers, right? Those have to be handshake agreements, and we have to sort of all play nice together. And quite a few networks and services out there do connect to Google Buzz, and Google Buzz does connect to many other services. But it's something that I think I would like to encourage the whole world. Every time I go have these talks, I think that the social web is becoming increasingly distributed. That we find that all these different products and all these different networks, when we add them up, give us a social experience that's better than just any one of them. So I think it's a goal that we should all have to connect. Right now, using the Google Buzz API, anybody can pretty much do anything they need to do to fully connect with that network. And I'd like to encourage them to do so. And if you know anybody I should talk to, I would like to do that. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and end there. I'm going to head out to this demo pod area. I don't know what you're mumbling about, but yes, I'll give you a moment. I'm going to head out to the demo pod area, so join me and we can talk a little bit more about all this stuff. And thank you so much for coming today.